After 8 long years of running my father's company, I had finally done it. I turned it into a $97 million success. I poured everything I had into Anderson and Company, breathing life into a business that once struggled to survive. Then, everything changed during a family dinner that was supposed to be a celebration. My father smiled at me, calm and proud. Then he placed his hand on my brother's shoulder and said the words that hit me like a freight train. "Your brother will take over now." I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my face steady. Years of practice had taught me how to hide the storm inside. I smiled back, pretending those words hadn't just shattered 8 years of my life's work. The room was buzzing with conversation, clinking glasses, and congratulatory nods. It was supposed to be a night of honor, for what we had built, for what I had built. But suddenly, I was invisible. I grew up watching my father struggle to keep Anderson and Company alive, a modest logistics firm that barely held on in the early days. He worked late nights, skipped family vacations, and fought for every contract. When I was 26, fresh out of business school, I had to fight just to be allowed to help. But once I stepped in, I transformed everything. I took that small regional business and turned it into a national powerhouse. I brought in million-dollar contracts, implemented cutting-edge technology, and restructured our operations from top to bottom. And yet none of it mattered. My brother Peter, who had never shown any real interest in the company, was now taking over. He had spent the last 7 years bouncing between half-hearted ventures, always chasing shortcuts and quick wins. Logistics didn't interest him. Building something never interested him. But power did. As the applause and congratulations flowed his way, he lowered his gaze, pretending to be humble. But I knew better. He had been waiting for this moment. He had played his role well. The dutiful son finally ready to carry the torch. And my father, always the traditionalist, saw no flaw in giving the family business to his son. After all, in his eyes, a daughter's contribution was temporary. No matter how hard I worked, I was never the heir, just a placeholder. But what they didn't realize was that I hadn't just built a company, I had built my position in it. While they were stuck in their outdated ideas, I had quietly secured every part of the foundation. Every key client relationship, every strategic decision, every growth initiative, my fingerprints were on all of it, and tomorrow morning, they would see exactly what that meant. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying every late night, every tough decision, every sacrifice I had made. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I gave everything to Anderson and Company. The late nights, the missed birthdays, the friendships and relationships that couldn't survive the weight of my ambition. It all went into building this business. Every part of my life was shaped around it. And now, they expected me to just step aside. They had underestimated me. By 4 a.m., I was in my home office, the glow of my computer lighting up the room. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up contracts, shareholder documents, executive agreements, everything I had quietly worked on over the years. No one knew this company better than I did. Not my father, and certainly not Peter. Peter thought this would be a smooth transition. That by next week, his name would be on the CEO's door, and his title would be official. But while my father was busy attending public events and Peter was pretending to care about logistics, I was working behind the scenes on something much more important. Control. At 9 a.m., I walked into Anderson and Company's headquarters, just like I had every morning for the last 8 years. The same polished floors, the same steady hum of phones ringing and people typing. But today felt different. Today, this wasn't just an office. It was a battlefield. The reception area was quiet. Too quiet. Whispers had already started. Word of my father's announcement at dinner had spread fast. Some employees looked away when I passed, unsure where to place their loyalty. Others just nodded politely, avoiding eye contact. I didn't slow down. I walked tall, heels clicking on the marble floor. I had learned a long time ago, never let them see you shaken. I stepped into my office and quietly shut the door behind me. I had exactly 12 minutes before they arrived, expecting to claim their new roles, my father as the reigning founder once again, and Peter as the chosen heir. 12 minutes before their plan fell apart. I sat at my desk, took a steady breath, and turned on my computer. The screen lit up with confidential files, documents they'd never bothered to look at, agreements they thought didn't matter. But they mattered. One file sat at the top, Executive Shareholders Agreement. I opened it and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a sharp knock at the door. I didn't answer. It opened anyway. My father walked in first, calm and commanding. Behind him, Peter followed, all dressed up in a navy suit, looking smug, like a prince about to be crowned. His confidence was rehearsed, while my father's came naturally, like he already believed the crown was his to give. "Anna," my father said, his tone firm but polite. "I assume you're aware of the transition taking place today." "Transition?" I repeated, leaning back in my chair. Interesting choice of word. "Yes, I'm aware." "Good," he said with a nod as if everything was going according to plan. "Peter will be stepping in as the new CEO. We'll need you to help with the handover. Make sure he's fully up to speed before you officially step away." I raised an eyebrow. "Step away?"
His jaw tightened.
He didn't like being questioned. He wasn't used to it. "Anna," he said, his voice colder now. "This isn't up for debate. The decision has been made." I smiled slowly, calm and knowing. "I'm aware of that, Dad," I said gently. "The thing is, you don't have the authority to make that decision." Peter scoffed, shaking his head. "Anna, come on. Don't turn this into a fight. We're trying to do this the easy way." I didn't answer him. Instead, I picked up the remote from my desk and pressed a button. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. A document appeared, bold and clear. Executive Shareholders Agreement. The same one neither of them had ever read. The same one that would turn their entire plan upside down. I had been reviewing an old Executive Shareholders Agreement, signed back on September 22nd, 2013. The signatories were Anna Anderson, Lawrence Anderson, my father, and Peter Anderson. As I glanced at my father, I noticed his face pale slightly. I turned to Peter. "Do you even know what this document is?" I asked. He folded his arms and shifted uncomfortably. "A shareholders agreement," he guessed. I nodded.
"Yes."
"And do you know what it says?" I tapped on a specific clause. This was created during the company's restructuring. It clearly states that any major decision, like appointing a new CEO, must be approved by all majority shareholders. I locked eyes with my father. "And Dad, I own 72% of the company." The room went silent. My father's face grew stern. "That's not possible," Peter muttered and stepped forward to get a better look. "Oh, it's very possible," I replied calmly. "While you were busy chasing startup dreams and Dad was playing the role of company patriarch, I was doing something else. I was securing my future." I leaned in closer. "Remember when you needed funding for expansion in 2014? You gave me 22% of your shares for that investment. Then in 2016, during the legal battle, you handed over another 14% as collateral. You never took it back. Add that to the 31% I originally owned, and here we are." My father clenched his jaw. Peter's face turned pale with panic. "You're bluffing," he snapped. Without a word, I handed him a second document. "This is the latest legal filing with the state. Go ahead, verify it." Peter grabbed the paper, scanning it quickly. His face drained of all color. "You can't do this," he stammered. "Dad, tell her she can't do this." But my father said nothing. He knew I hadn't broken the rules. I had played the game better. I stood up slowly. "I'm not firing you, Peter," I said. "I wouldn't want to force you into the real job market. But from now on, you'll report to me. You'll work under my leadership. Otherwise," I gestured toward the door, "you're free to leave." Peter looked at our father, silently pleading for help. But for the first time in his life, my father had no solution. Because this wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. The silence in my office was heavy. Peter still clutched the paper, his knuckles white. My father stood beside him, his expression unreadable, but I knew he was calculating, looking for a way out. There wasn't one. I had prepared for this moment not out of spite, but because I had learned that when power is involved, loyalty is never guaranteed. For the first time ever, my father looked at me as if I was a stranger. Maybe he never really knew me. So that's it, Peter finally said, his voice full of bitterness. You're just taking everything? I let out a dry laugh. Taking everything? I stepped closer. Peter, I built this company. Every deal, every expansion, every innovation, I was the one holding it all together. While you failed your way through opportunities, I kept this company alive. So no, I'm not taking anything. I'm keeping what's already mine. Peter's face twisted in anger, but he had no comeback. And worse, he knew I was right. So did our father. For years, my father believed that family name was more important than ability, that his son would inherit what I had worked for. He was wrong. And now he was facing the consequences. You're making a mistake, Anna, he said finally, his voice even but strained. Families should stick together. Do you want to burn this bridge? I met his gaze without blinking. Dad, I said quietly, you burned this bridge the day you made decisions without me. His lips tightened into a hard line. Business is bigger than one person. We can find a solution that works for everyone. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to consider. I agree. That's why I'm offering you both a choice. I turned to Peter first. You can stay with the company, I said, my tone calm and professional. You won't be CEO. You'll serve as an advisor. You'll have a solid salary but limited authority. And you will answer to me. Peter stiffened but said nothing. The message was clear. The power had shifted, and it wasn't coming back. But I didn't stop. I kept going. You can walk away, I said calmly. I'll buy your shares at market value. Take the money, find a new venture, and pour your energy into something else. My father scoffed. You're acting like you hold all the cards. I gave him a small, knowing smile. That's because I do. A heavy silence followed. I let it stretch. I wanted them to sit with that truth, to feel what it was like to have no control, to realize the game had changed, and they weren't the ones calling the shots anymore. Finally, my father exhaled and shook his head, disbelief written all over his face. I never thought you'd do this, he said quietly. Not to your own family. His words hit me harder than I expected. Not to your own family. I wanted to tell him that he was the one who started this, that he had chosen to cast me aside, treat me like a placeholder, a temporary fix. But I didn't say it, because in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't going to let them take what I had built. Not now, not ever. Peter stormed out first. Good riddance. I knew exactly what his next move would be. He'd go to our extended family, to old friends and business contacts, spinning the story to paint himself as the victim of corporate betrayal. Let him. I wasn't here to win their approval. I was here to secure my future. My father stayed a moment longer, almost as if he expected me to change my mind. I didn't, and when it was clear I wouldn't, he gave a slow nod. You've changed, he said quietly. I met his gaze. No, Dad. I just finally stopped pretending. Then he left too. I exhaled, sinking back into my chair. I should have felt victorious. I had fought for my place, and I had won. But instead, I felt something else. A quiet ache. A part of me, no matter how small, had always wanted his approval. I had spent years proving myself, hoping that one day he'd see me. But the truth was he never had. And now he had no choice. He didn't see a daughter anymore. He saw the real me, the leader of Anderson and Company. I turned back to my computer. My focus shifted. I had spent 8 years building this company. Now I would spend the next 8 making it bulletproof. My father and Peter had tried to take everything from me. In the end, they lost everything instead. For the first time in over a decade, my office was silent. No calls from my father. No passive-aggressive emails from Peter. Just silence. But silence didn't mean peace. It meant war. I knew neither of them would back down easily. My father wouldn't walk away quietly. Peter would fight, convinced that this company was his by birthright. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. It had only just begun. By the next morning, the shift in the air was clear. People who had smiled at me last week now avoided eye contact. Department heads hesitated when they spoke to me. I could feel the whispers. I knew what was happening. My father and Peter were already working their connections. Old friends, board members, senior executives, spreading doubts, twisting stories. They were painting me as cold, ruthless, and disloyal. Peter especially had taken on the role of the betrayed younger brother. I could see it now. Him sitting in a fancy restaurant, voice full of fake sadness, telling investors how his sister stole the company from him and my father. He didn't need to say much. Just a sigh, a solemn shake of the head, a soft line like, "I only ever wanted the best for my children." It was subtle, it was calculated, and it was dangerous. Because if they managed to turn enough people against me, especially the board, I could be pushed out. Maybe not legally, but they could make my leadership a nightmare. I wasn't going to let that happen. That afternoon, I called an emergency executive meeting. When I stepped into the boardroom, the tension hit me instantly. Half the room wouldn't meet my eyes. The other half watched me too closely, waiting for a mistake. I walked to the head of the table.
My seat, and I sat down.
"Let's not waste time," I said, my voice even and clear. "I know there have been conversations behind closed doors over drinks and whispers." I looked around the room, letting my gaze rest on each face for a second longer than was comfortable. Enough to make them shift in their seats. I'm not here to silence opinions, but I am here to lead. And if anyone doubts my vision, my leadership, or my right to sit in this chair, speak now, or step aside. I could feel the discomfort in the room. Some people were wondering if I had what it takes to keep leading this company. A few shifted in their seats. No one said a word. I tapped my fingers lightly on the polished table in front of me. "Let's clear that up," I said. I turned on the screen behind me, pulling up a presentation, charts, numbers, performance metrics. In the last 4 years, I've taken this company from a small regional player to a $97 million industry leader. Revenue is up 477%. We've entered 5 new markets. This didn't happen by luck. I looked toward Frank, our CFO. "Frank, is there a single financial indicator suggesting the company is in trouble under my leadership?" Frank hesitated, then shook his head.
No.
In fact, the numbers show we're expecting another 30% growth next quarter. I nodded once. "So, let's be honest about what's going on here." I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. "My father and brother aren't angry because this company is failing. They're angry because it's succeeding without them. They expected me to step aside and hand Peter control, no matter his qualifications, no matter the results." The room was silent until I dropped the next truth. "I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last 33 hours. Offers were made, favors, incentives, to push for my resignation." I let that settle. If anyone wants to admit to those conversations now, this is your chance. More shifting, uneasy glances. Then, one of the senior executives finally spoke. "I received a call," he said, clearing his throat. "From your father. He said he was thinking about appealing to the board." I nodded. "And did he offer anything in return for your support?" The executive paused. Then slowly he nodded.
Yes.
"There it is," I said, standing. "Let's not rewrite history. My father built this company, and I respect that. But I took it further than he ever imagined. I will not let him pull the strings from the outside." I let my voice go cold, sharp. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. I gathered my documents, pausing to meet the eyes of every executive in the room. If anyone here believes my father and brother should be in control, now is the time to say it. No one moved. No one spoke. "Good," I said. And I walked out head high. This wasn't just about holding on to what I'd built. It was about making sure they knew they'd never take it from me again. That night, I made a call, not to the board, not to an investor, but to the media. By morning, every major business outlet carried the same headline. "Power shift at Anderson & Co. Anna Anderson outmaneuvers family in boardroom battle." I had made my move. Now I was waiting for theirs. By the next morning, my inbox exploded, emails, missed calls, and messages from journalists, investors, and board members. Some were supportive. Others were cautious. But most of them asked the same thing. Is it true? I didn't respond.
Not yet.
I knew the game my father was playing. He had spent decades shaping his image. He understood that in business, reputation could be just as powerful as facts. If he couldn't beat me in the boardroom, he'd try to destroy me in the public eye, and sure enough, by noon, the counterattack arrived, a carefully worded press release. Anderson and Company has always been a family-run business. We are saddened by recent developments, but remain committed to the values that built this company. Leadership changes are natural, and we hope for a smooth transition going forward. It was subtle, but I knew exactly what it was meant to say. Anna is reckless. Anna is unstable. Anna isn't a team player. I wasn't surprised, but I was furious. I sat in my office, watching the news as analysts dissected the story. Was Anna Anderson too aggressive in her takeover? Will her leadership style hurt the company's future? Is she facing a PR disaster she can't recover from? They talked like I wasn't watching, like I wasn't already planning my next move. But I was. If my father and Peter wanted a public war, I was ready to give them one. I didn't release a statement. I didn't hold a press conference. Instead, I made one quiet phone call to an old friend who worked in investigative journalism. I have something for you, I said, but you'll need to move fast. An hour later, I sent over everything: documents, emails, financial reports, and internal records. It was all evidence of the mess Anderson and Company had been hiding for years, mistakes made under my father's leadership. I had spent the last decade cleaning it up in silence. Within 30 hours, the story went live. Behind the curtain at Anderson & Co., a legacy of debt and cover UPS. The article pulled no punches. It exposed the hidden financial issues, praised my leadership for fixing them, and made one thing clear: I was the reason this company was still standing. Not my father. Not Peter. Me. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The board stopped doubting. Investors stopped hesitating. And my father, he had nowhere left to hide. 3 days later, he finally called. I let the phone ring 4 times before I answered. Anna, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair. Do we? There was silence. Then a sigh. You didn't have to do that. I gave a short laugh. Neither did you. This company was supposed to be a legacy, he said. For the family. For both of you. I felt a small, sharp pain in my chest. A part of me had once wanted that too. But not anymore. Dad, I said quietly, if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to take it from me. Another long silence followed. Then he asked, slowly, almost reluctantly, what happens now? I took a breath. Now? And make sure you never get the chance to touch this company again. The war was over. My father had lost. Peter had disappeared. And I had won. But as I sat in my office, staring out over the skyline, there was no victory in how I felt. No thrill. No celebration. Just a quiet emptiness. I had spent 8 years fighting for Anderson and Company, growing it, protecting it, transforming it. And now it was truly mine. But the cost? That was heavier than I expected. Because somewhere along the way, I had lost something else, my family. The next day, I walked into the office like it was any other morning. But everything had changed. The whispers had stopped. The doubts had faded. People no longer looked at me as just the CEO. I was Anna Anderson, the woman who had taken control, who had outplayed her own family and come out on top. Some respected me for it. Some feared me. And some, they waited quietly for me to fail. I let them wait. At noon, my father and I met one last time in the conference room. He looked tired, older, worn down. It was like the full weight of everything that had happened had finally caught up with him. I waited for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I'm retiring, he said. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I had expected this. I'll sell most of my shares, he continued. I'll keep a small stake as an investor, but I won't be involved anymore. I studied him closely. And Peter? His jaw clenched. He's gone. Took the buyout. He won't be back. I had known it would end this way. Peter had never been strong enough to stand on his own. Once he saw he'd lost, he did what he always did, he ran. Still, hearing it said aloud made something inside me shift. It wasn't regretful. It wasn't guilt. It was just the end. I nodded. Understood. My father sighed and rubbed his temples like he had a headache. Then, after a long pause, he looked at me and said something I never expected. I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And strangely, I realized I didn't need it anymore. A month later, Anderson and company looked completely different. The board members who had backed my father and Peter?
Gone.
The executives who had once questioned my leadership? Replaced. The company had always thrived under me, but now it was fully mine. And with that control came a new direction. I introduced changes my father had always dismissed. I modernized systems he had called unnecessary. I expanded into industries he had been too afraid to touch. I wasn't just leading, I was transforming. Within 8 months, profits skyrocketed. Within a year, we passed the $200 million mark. And for the first time, I wasn't fighting to prove I belonged. I was building something no one could ever take from me again. 1 year after it all ended, my father and I met for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since his retirement. He looked different, calmer. Not defeated, just at peace. I read about the latest deal you closed, he said over his drink. Smart move. I smirked slightly. I know. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. There was no tension between us anymore. No more power struggle. No more war. Just the quiet truth between us. He had tried to cast me aside, and I had proved him wrong. He raised his glass. To Anderson and company. This time, when I clinked my glass against him, there was no anger, no bitterness. Just peace. Because I had already won, and I didn't need his approval to know it. Now, as I sit in my office, looking out over the city where I built my empire, I reflect on what this journey has taught me. Sometimes, family isn't your ally, they're your competition. That loyalty is valuable, but never guaranteed. That power isn't handed over. It's earned, claimed, taken, and most of all, that the best way to prove your worth isn't through their validation. It's by building something so solid, so undeniable, that they can never overlook you again. I have no regrets. Anderson and company is mine now, and I'll make sure no one ever forgets it.